Welcome, welcome. Rise up. Glory, glory. Of all creation,
Go a little louder.
with all their
Just a little more.
laws, you chose the one that gave birth to stars. Of all the houses in the neighborhood, the green and blue one, you chose it good, you chose it good. Of all the ways to roll the dice, you spun the numbers, landed on life. Out of the fire, out of the sea, out of the stillness, you rose with me and singing, welcome, welcome. From dust you awaken, rise up, this form you've taken, glory, glory. Let there be time to give the gift that only you were born to give. Join the game. You chose the challenge, yet you remain. You lit your candle in the darkness. You heard the call, and you said yes. So I say, welcome, welcome. From dust you awaken. Rise up. This form you've taken. Glory, glory. Let there be time to give the gift that only you were born to give. So come what may, child, come out and play now. So come what may, child, come out and play now. So come what may, child, come out and play now. So come what may, child, come out and play now. Welcome, welcome. From dust you awaken. Rise up. This form you've taken. Glory, glory. Let there be time to welcome. From dust you awaken. Rise up. This form you've taken. Glory, glory. Let there be time to give the gift that only you were born to give.
Good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for being here this evening for the launch of our new campaign, With All Our Might, How Jewish Congregations and Organizations Can Invest in a Just and Livable Future. You are here with Dayenu circles and Dayenu members and leaders from across the country. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'd love for everyone to introduce yourselves if you're able in the chat. Let us know your name, your pronouns if you'd like, where you are joining us from this evening. And if you're part of a congregation, a Dayenu circle, or an organization, please let us know. We'll take a moment to just say hi to each other. And while you're doing that, I'll let you know, if you haven't heard it before, that beautiful song, Welcome, Welcome by Zoe Toby. Hi, Meredith and Mike. Oh, these are coming in fast. Wonderful. Portland in the house, Portland, Oregon, Evanston, Illinois, Chicago, New Jersey, New York City, Davis, California, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Beautiful. Vancouver, Washington. Wonderful to have you all here. Hi, Alyssa. Love it. Keep those coming in and just take a chance at take a second to scroll through and see who we're joined by tonight. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Vicki Kaplan. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Director of Organizing at Dayenu, and I will be your host this evening, and we'll also do a little bit of speaking myself later on. We're here because last month we launched, Dayenu launched our new report, With All Our Might, How the Jewish Community Can Invest in a Just, Livable Future. The report focuses on how Jewish communities can help keep fossil fuels in the ground by educating ourselves and our communities, by engaging our financial institutions, and by moving our money into institutions that don't finance the fossil fuel industry. And the response really has been affirming and wonderful. We can see that in part by the number of people who are with us tonight. And now we're excited to gather and to kick off our winter and spring campaign to make meaningful change together. And here you'll see on your screen, and I'll read these out loud as well, the goals in this new campaign. These are our goals. Number one, to educate, engage, and mobilize the Jewish community to take bold systemic action on climate. Number two, to move potentially billions of dollars in Jewish communal assets out of fossil fuel investments. And three, to leverage our institutions' power as clients and customers to urge the world's largest asset managers and banks to stop financing coal, oil, and gas. A few housekeeping items, and then I'll let you know who we're going to hear from tonight. First, if you need them, you can turn on auto captions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please make use of the chat to ask questions throughout the event. Our team, we have a great team of Dayenu staff and fellows with us tonight, Muriel, Joe, and Phil, who will do our best to answer your questions, be they substantive or technical. If you need help with the Zoom technology, feel free to ask those questions directly to Phil, Joe, or Muriel, or to everyone in the chat. And you might ask a question that another participant tonight has the answer to. So feel free also to attempt to answer each other's questions. We are in community together. And we are recording this event. We will send out the recording via email to everybody who RSVP'd for the event tonight. And we'll also be sharing links to the report that I've mentioned and new resources that we are creating for you. So stay tuned. Keep an eye on your email from Dayenu, from myself or Muriel. We will get those to you very quickly. Here's what we've got in store tonight. We are going to hear from some great experts and speakers. First, we will get a treat of a brief kavanah, or intention for our time together, from Rabbi Rachel Kahn-Troster, who is the Executive Vice President at the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, a great organization. Then Dayenu's Washington Director, Dahlia Rockowitz, will brief us on our new report. I will then be back to walk us through our campaign timeline from now through June of this year, and the opportunities for you to take on leadership and to participate. And then we'll hear again from Rabbi Kahn-Troster about how our work fits together into a larger movement. And we'll hear from Mark Grossman, a Dayenu Circle member who was part of a successful effort in his congregation to move their money out of one of the major banks funding the fossil fuel industry. Really looking forward to hearing from all of you. Without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Rabbi Rachel Kahn-Troster to offer a kavanah, or intention, for us this evening. And just a heads up, after Rachel speaks, we'll then hear right away from Dahlia Rockowitz. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you for being here.
Hi, it is really great to be with all of you tonight. Thank you so much for having me. So when I gather with others to do activism, what grounds me is often a traditional Jewish prayer that's the prayer for travelers. And it resonates with me. I've shared it before actions or in communities with other activists, because it recognizes that, when the activism and working together to make change is a journey, and there's all kinds of unknown things that might befall you. But if you have trust in the work that you're doing and the people you're doing it together with, what resonates with me is this ask that we return home in peace. The journey is unknown. We don't know how we're going to get there, but the destination is really understood, and it's one of certainty. And so it's one I often share with activists when they embark on something new. So I'm going to share that with all of us tonight. And think about it less about a journey, a physical journey, but a journey of making the world, of repairing the world and making it a better place. May it be your will, Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, to guide us in peace, to sustain us in peace, to lead us to a desired destination in health and joy and peace, and bring us home and peace. Save us from disaster on the way and from all that threatens the world. Bless the work of our hands. May we find grace, love, and compassion in your sight and the sight of all who see us. Hear our words, for you listen to prayer and supplication. Praised are you, God, who hears prayer.
Amen. Thank you, Rachel. Hello, everyone. I am Dahlia Rakowitz. I am Dayenu's Washington director, and it is so great to be here with you to see familiar faces, see familiar names, to see new names and new faces. It's great to be here to set out on this journey together. And I want to start by actually referring to a journey we set out on almost 2 years ago today. And I will acknowledge that if you're on the Dayenu list, if you've joined Dayenu calls, you've probably heard from me in the last 2 years talking about federal policy. And thanks to committed climate activists, just like all of you here on this call, and like so many Dayenu circles that joined in the effort to pass federal climate legislation, I'm happy to share that we made progress passing the first ever piece of meaningful climate legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act. And you can see President Biden signing the Inflation Reduction Act here on your screen. And this really represented a move that needs to happen, investments in a clean energy future while providing millions of good jobs in the process. But even while we celebrate good news, we also have to acknowledge hard truths. Climate change is here, and we are already getting glimpses of what a runaway climate change could mean to our communities and to future generations. And most recently, I want to acknowledge the onslaught of drenching rains in California and giving us a glimpse that if we fail to turn the tide, what it could look like to experience extreme weather on a daily basis. The good news is that the clean energy revolution is well on its way, and frankly, it is accelerating due to the Inflation Reduction Act. Trillions of dollars of private and public funding, much of which in the Inflation Reduction Act itself, are going to deploy solar, wind, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, and much, much more, what we often refer to as catch-all climate solutions. And here on your screen, you can see that the result of that investment is more accessible and more affordable clean energy. And it is really clear clean energy is the future. It's just a matter of how quickly we can get there and ensuring that everyone can access it and share in its benefits. So the way forward is clear. We need to accelerate that transition. We need to turn the tide of the climate crisis and secure a just and livable future for generations to come. And we do that by ending our reliance on fossil fuels. As you can see, that's where our arrow is pointing down. And we need to rapidly transition to an economy that's run on clean, renewable energy. Thanks to our campaigning efforts, we see that coming together, even setting out on this unknown journey, as Rachel shared with us, we can reach a destination that is this just and livable future. But we have made great strides on the on the right side of the screen. I always have to hold up my fingers to remind myself left and right still. We have made great strides in bringing forth that clean energy future, and we need to look at the other side of the equation. Because the world's leading scientists tell us that to avoid the most harmful impacts of the climate crisis, we have to have global greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, just 7 years from now, and we need to reach zero greenhouse gas emissions, zero out climate pollution no later than 2050. And we also know that fossil fuels are a major contributor in those greenhouse gas emissions. Coal, oil, and gas fossil fuels contribute 75% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So rather than trying to reduce emissions once those fossil fuels are out of the ground, we can accelerate this process. We can achieve what science and justice demand by keeping fossil fuels in the ground and unburned. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. Coal, oil, and gas companies, they have little incentive to change. After all, their core business model is the extraction and distribution of polluting fossil fuels. And for decades, fossil fuel companies have spewed greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, polluting our air and water, sowing misinformation, and blocking climate action just to make a profit. And here is a headline from just a few days ago. We know this to be true, but additional research and findings was released that showed that ExxonMobil scientists knew for 50 years, the impact that fossil fuels would have on our climate and our future, and they chose not to change. So we have limited ability to move those fossil fuel companies. They've really shown us where they stand. So we are taking a different tack, and one that has been a path that has been laid forth, frankly, by faith activists before us, and you'll hear a little more on that from Rachel later in the call. But we need to end the era of fossil fuels by ensuring that these fossil fuel companies don't have the money or public support that they need to drill, mine, and frack. So we need to force them to change if they won't change on their own. At the moment, the 20 largest US oil and gas companies are raking in record profits, a whopping $261 billion in 2022. However, we also want to acknowledge that those record profits are not about the ascendance of oil and gas or a return to oil and gas, but instead they are products of war profiteering from Russia's invasion of Ukraine and fossil fuel companies intentionally keeping energy prices high. In the long term, renewable energy is the future. And we have seen, because those prices are dropping, because this clean energy future is undeniable, in the long term, renewable investments have begun to outpace fossil fuels. That means if you invest in renewables, you will be making a larger return than if you continue to invest in fossil fuels. And this means that for financial institutions who we want to change, and their clients and customers, including the American Jewish community, doing the right thing, investing in a clean energy future, moving our money out of fossil fuels and into that clean energy future is not only the smart thing to do, is not only the right thing to do, excuse me, it's the smart thing to do. And we have an especially significant role to play here in North America. And that's because these financial institutions that are continuing to invest in fossil fuels, 7 of the largest investors in fossil fuels are actually based right here in the United States. As some of you know, we have dubbed them the Shmutzi Sheva, and you'll see their logos on the screen shortly. It is a combination of asset managers and banks. But these are all based in the US. And I will say, I've been looking in the chat to see if we have any Canadians on the line, but another large investor in fossil fuels is the Royal Bank of Canada. So we here in North America have an outsized role to play. And we as a faith community have a unique role to play. We have power as customers and clients of these financial institutions. Oh, great, I'm seeing Canada. Canada is in the house. Because we are based here in North America, we are more likely to be the clients and customers of these institutions. And because we are speaking with our faith voice, we bring a moral orientation, a moral call to action to this work. And so we at Dayenu believe that American Jewish institutions have that much of a more powerful moral voice to bring to this conversation and bring to this campaign. Last month, we launched a report and a roadmap for action in this area of fossil fuels, this area of moving our money out of fossil fuels so that we can withhold the financial backing and public support for those polluting fossil fuels and towards clean energy. And that report included original research on Jewish communal investments, looking at major Jewish institutions chosen for their influence within the Jewish community, their large investment dollars that they have, and also publicly available information about those investment dollars. And this is the beautiful cover of that report. I want to acknowledge that we were really lucky to have this bespoke piece of artwork that the artist Sol Weiss created for us for the report. And inside the report, I know many of you joined the launch call. We looked in particular, if you go to the next slide, at different sectors of the Jewish community, movements, the 20 largest, the 4 major denominational movements. We looked at federations, the 20 largest federations and their Jewish community funds and the National Federation body, and foundations, 20 of the largest endowed Jewish foundations, again, chosen for their influence, the size of their investments, and for publicly available information. And we wanted to better understand how much money these institutions had invested in fossil fuels that instead could be directed to fund the transition to a clean energy future. And you can read the full report and the executive summary at dayenu.org/climate-invest. But I wanted to pull out a few key findings relevant to tonight's conversation. And in the report, we found that the institutions represented had roughly $34.7 billion in assets and an estimated $3.3 billion invested in fossil fuels. And I think that part of what we can extrapolate from that, and part of what we can acknowledge about ourselves and our institutions, is that nearly all Jewish institutions have some money invested in fossil fuels to varying degrees, whether or not that they know it. And this represents an opportunity. It also represents a call to action. We have skin in the game. We have a dog in this fight. And we need to embrace our power as the clients, customers, and sometimes even shareholders of the financial institutions that are continuing to invest in fossil fuels, to educate and advocate for these financial institutions to move their money by telling them that we want our money to go towards clean energy and not fossil fuels. And the report that we launched last month indicated 2 tracks. One for larger institutions, such as the ones that I referenced on my last slide and whose finances are represented on this slide. And those are institutions that tend to have endowments, pension funds, or investments that are managed by asset managers or investment managers. And we really want those institutions to focus on their investments and educate and advocate with asset managers and investment advisors. But for smaller Jewish institutions and for congregations, we have another track, and that is focused on banks. That's because all of these institutions hold their money in some bank, and they can leverage their banking relationships for good. We can leverage our banking relationships for good. So tonight, we are focused on this banking work. And when we're deciding to bank, Jewish institutions may unknowingly be investing in fossil fuels. That's because the banks that we deposit our money in, if you just want to go back to one slide, that would be great. Thank you. That's because the banks where we park our dollars may decide to invest our deposited money in fossil fuels. So in choosing a bank, we essentially give a green light to a bank that has decided to invest in fossil fuels to do so. We give the money and the public support for the continued extraction of fossil fuels. And I like this slide because it shows that those very same institutions have claimed that they instead want to align their investments and their business with the Paris Agreement. They want to phase out fossil fuels and be a part of the climate solution. And on the left side is an announcement that 40 plus banks around the world came together in 2021 and pledged to align their business with the Paris Agreement to ultimately phase out of fossil fuels within the Paris timeline. But on the right side is actually a report that was just released this week, which is those same banks are continuing, despite these pledges, continuing to invest in fossil fuels. And so what we really need to do is bring our power as customers and clients to bear, and remind them of those promises and see if this is something that they feel they truly can and want to take on, or if it's really just greenwashing. And we are approaching a key moment in the year, annual shareholder meetings. This is when institutions, including these banks, set new policies, some of which can demonstrate whether or not they're truly committed to climate action. Can they set policies that set them on the course to this commitment to phase out fossil fuels? So what we aim to do is to rally Jewish institutions to ratchet up pressure with these banks in the lead up to shareholder season. And Vicki is going to talk more about how our work is organized towards shareholder season. And we want to make clear that if they don't show support, if they're not making meaningful steps towards this goal of phasing out fossil fuels, that we will hold them to account. And we might be willing to move our dough from that institution to a fossil-free institution. And to do this, we are going to be following a roadmap, the same roadmap that was included in the report we released last month. And the beauty of this roadmap is that it applies to large and small institutions, congregations and federations, and it applies to institutions who are focused on their investments and for institutions that are focused on their banks. I'm going to provide a general overview of what that looks like, but you can see on your screen the 6 steps of the roadmap. And it's the same roadmap for investments and for banks, but we've targeted it for our bank strategy, which is what we'll go through here, so that it's best fit for you and your community and what will be most impactful for the banks. So if you want to go to the next slide. Our first step is assembling our team and engaging in Jewish learning and strategizing for the months ahead. This is what we call Reshit Chokhmah, or grounding. This is going to be happening very soon, and some of you actually might have already started on this process. So that is great. You're already on your way. Step 2, if you want to click forward, great, is researching your bank. What's their record on fossil fuels? Do they invest in fossil fuels? What have they committed to do? This is really where we want to be doing this accounting, this cheshbon. Our third step is bringing our community into the conversation, educating them about climate justice, and about the role that fossil fuels play in preventing meaningful climate action and how we can instead reinvest in a clean energy future. We call this step limud. It's focused on education and learning. Then we get to really the heart of our work, which is engaging with banks. Sicha, or dialogue, is about sending letters, meeting with bank officials, and using other creative tactics to tell these banks that we expect them to live up to their promises and to phase out fossil fuels. From there, if we don't see significant change, we want to set a public intention to hold these institutions accountable. That may mean moving our money out of that financial institution. It may mean sticking around and continuing to engage, but we want to do that publicly and forcefully. And lastly, the last step in the process, for those who see accountability as moving their money out of that financial institution, we will do so together. We will do so publicly and loudly to make clear where we stand and to make clear that these financial institutions, if they fail to change, are on the wrong side of history. That was a really top level overview. Vicki will be going into greater detail, but I wanted to say each step of this process is critical and important. We hope that you tonight will agree to join us in this process and follow the roadmap one step at a time. Each step forward is a significant step into the unknown, and I'm really glad to be on this journey with all of you. So I know there's been a really robust chat. So I am just catching up briefly on some of the questions that have been asked. And I see some questions about the report itself. Great. And I will say that I provided a really rough overview and really encourage you to check out the report in full detail. But I wanted to emphasize that in the report, when assessing the numbers, we used a median for aggregate fossil fuel exposure to fossil fuels. Exposure is another way of saying investments in fossil fuels. So that is different than an average. So the aggregate amount, it would be different than the total percentage. So I'm sure there were some great back of the envelope calculations happening, and I appreciate that question being asked. And really our attempt was to be as thoughtful and strategic in our research, and also to see what we could learn from those findings that apply to the broader Jewish community, which is really that we are invested in fossil fuels, whether or not we know it. And we have this opportunity to be a part of the solution and push these financial institutions to do the same. I believe that is all I have time for. So I am going to hand it to Vicki, who's going to take what I shared and really go into much greater detail.
Thank you so much, Dahlia. I keep learning from you every time I hear one of your briefings, and I really learned a lot digging into that report myself back in December. So as Dahlia teed up, I'm going to now share with you a little bit about how the roadmap that Dahlia shared applies to our campaign arc, our organizing timeline for the spring. But first, I just want to ask everybody here tonight, and please share your responses in the chat. How familiar are you? How comfortable do you feel with, or how much have you heard about this tactic or this strategy of screening out fossil fuels, of moving institutional money as a way to have impact on climate change? I'd love to hear in the chat. Let us know if you've been part of an effort like this before, if this is your first introduction to this approach to tackling the climate crisis, or anything in between. Go ahead and share briefly in the chat right now. Great, several folks very familiar. Yep, involved with Third Act, who we also coordinate with. Part of many efforts and studies, done some education. Great, so I'm hearing already from a lot of folks who are pretty familiar and experienced with this approach to climate action. Heard about it from other groups, right? So you've heard about it, maybe this is your first time joining an effort. Great, thanks for sharing, Cheryl, that you've been in webinars about moving personal finances, but not institutional. Yeah, this is definitely an institutional approach. Yeah, great, and Donna, I think Donna has already spoken with their financial advisor about this for their personal finances. And then several folks, hi Gabby, involved in the Passover actions. If you weren't part of those, this was Pesach 2022. About 1,000 of us gathered outside of the branches of some of the Shmutzi Sheva banks that Dahlia shared with us to bring these demands to them, telling the Passover story as we did that. Thank you, Brock, for sharing that Ukrainian climate activists are urging exactly this type of action. Beautiful source, beautiful and powerful source of inspiration. And Dayenu shares that you've tried and failed previously to make moves within your congregation. We're hoping that actually by moving collectively, moving together, and at this moment in time, that we can make significant progress. And thank you, Lonnie, for sharing. This is your first time hearing about this. Wonderful. So we're coming in from all different viewpoints and experiences, and that is what makes a group and a movement and a strategy strong. And I also want to, speaking of the Passover actions, I just want to remind folks that these banks, big banks you're familiar with, Citibank, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, are financing the companies that are behind some of the biggest, baddest, dirtiest fossil fuel projects that you may have heard of. Maybe you haven't, but perhaps you have. For example, the Mountain Valley Pipeline that has been in the news recently with Joe Manchin's dirty deal, which was supposedly traded for the Inflation Reduction Act. Mountain Valley Pipeline's financial backers are Bank of America, Wells Fargo, as well as PNC, SunTrust, and US Bank. The Line 5 pipeline that's proposed to go through Michigan is backed financially by Bank of America, Citibank, Chase, Wells Fargo, among the Shmutzi Sheva, and the list goes on. So if your angle coming into this is particularly concerned for certain fossil fuel projects, chances are they are connected to these banks that we're discussing tonight. And by acting together, what we're here tonight to do is we are aiming to recruit at least, I hope more based on tonight, at least 35 Jewish congregations and organizations that you are members of for a sustained period of action between now and this summer to put pressure on the banking sector to keep fossil fuels in the ground. And we're going to do this by educating our communities, by educating the public, by communicating our values to our banks in the lead up to shareholder season this spring, and to consider moving our dough to screen out fossil fuels. That is the summary of our organizing plan. Now, most of you here tonight are members of a congregation or a Jewish organization. Perhaps you're part of a Dayenu circle that's housed at that congregation or organization. And your congregation or organization most likely has a bank account. And chances are, just because we're like everybody else in the United States, chances are you're banking with one of the Shmutzi Sheva. We'll hear shortly from Mark Grossman about the congregation that he belongs to, which is one of several that have already made steps in this direction or moved their money. But the potential is so much greater than what's been done, which is, I think, what attracted you all to come tonight. I want to answer, why should we do this together? I tried it once before, it didn't go anywhere in my congregation. Why now? Why move together? So by moving together, we can support each other, we can share our learning, and we can be part of a movement which gives strength and even cover or some tailwinds to each of what otherwise would be individual efforts. You don't have to act in a silo. We now have a coordinated effort among all of the Dayenu circles, congregations, and organizations that are gathered here tonight or have reached out to be part of this campaign. And why are we doing this as institutions, not just as individuals, as many of you already have? Perhaps that one feels obvious. Institutions represent hundreds or thousands of people. And of course, it's fine for you individually to move your money out of fossil fuels. But in addition to that, we recognize that to really impact the fossil fuel companies and the banks that support them, we need to move as institutions representing more and more people. And why do this now? Again, because it's shareholder season. We'll hear more in detail from Rachel in just a few moments about what that means. But this is a time that banks are making decisions. They're taking direction from their shareholders. It's an opportunity for us to influence their decision-making and their policy-making. So you'll see in a moment on your screen our campaign arc. So this is a blank one. What is a campaign arc? A brief refresher for folks who have done Dayenu's organizing training. A campaign arc or escalation arc is the natural progression of a campaign. Excuse me. Each step should build on the previous one with periods of intensity and periods of rest and transition. So individual tactics don't happen without relation to each other, but they're building in a progression over time. And in this next diagram, I've plotted the 6 phases that Dalia articulated and that appear in the report when you download and read it. So those 6 phases are mapped onto this campaign arc. This gives you a roadmap of where we are going and how we get there. For those of you thinking about your Dayenu Circle plans for the spring, here you go. Here's the roadmap. So step 1, I'll walk us through this briefly. Step 1, we're here tonight for a campaign kickoff. That is our first step in the process, grounding ourselves in learning and in Jewish wisdom, our Reshit Chokhmah. Over January and into February, you'll be building your team, your core team of supportive allies within your congregation or organization. And you'll research your bank. You'll find out what bank does our congregation or organization, what bank do we use, who are we clients of, and what is their fossil fuel portfolio. That's the cheshbon. This builds up to a peak that you can see visualized here in April around Earth Day, April 22nd, which is after Passover. This is a key moment you're building up to. These are our community conversations, our limud, bringing our Jewish communities together to learn about the issue of fossil fuel finance, the role that our choices make in that, and how when we act together, we can make an impact on climate change for our lives and our children and grandchildren's future and future generations. Imagine 20, 50, 100, 200 people, or even more gathered in your sanctuary, in a park, in a public space for a day or an afternoon of learning and study and action together. And it's important that this is in the lead up to our shareholder season, because we can tell this story publicly through photos, through writing, through articles, through lessons learned at those community conversations, to demonstrate to a wider audience that we're watching the decisions of the shareholders and the banks at their shareholder meetings. We'll then naturally have a period of debrief. We'll come together to share what we've learned at these community conversations. And then just before the shareholder meetings that happen in April, May, and June, this is your opportunity to communicate publicly with your bank. We'll have a sample letter that you can edit and share with them. You can, after you share with them, tweet it or post it on social media to reach more people, write an article in a local newspaper. We're communicating publicly with the targets of our effort and our actions. And then after that, into the future, that was the sikha. And then into the future, after the shareholder meetings, is our kavanah and our kadima. That's when you have the option, the choice to move your organization or your congregation's dough or your money into a different bank, and also to see what efforts these banks are making towards the climate change goals that they have already stated, but they are falling behind on. And I'll just note, as folks have shared in the chat, that alongside the shareholder meetings in the spring, many of Dayenu's allies in the broader climate movement, including Third Act, will be organizing actions as well that many of you are already plugged into and that we'll continue to plug into locally as well as we build relationships. So what does success look like? It looks like acting together and acting publicly. It looks like having impact on shareholder season. For example, actually, I'll hold that because I'll let Rachel share this, what success might look like in shareholder season. It might mean moving your money to a new bank, but I want to note that the other pieces are as or possibly even more important. So this piece of acting together and publicly is really key to this whole strategy, which is why I'm so glad that so many of us are here together tonight. And to be clear, right now, we're not, what we're asking you to do is to commit to organizing your institution to follow the roadmap, including educating and engaging with your bank in the lead up to shareholder season. Depending on the outcome of shareholder season, we'll then explore whether to move money out of those financial institutions to fossil-free institutions. And we are here to provide lots of support. I'm going to share more about that after we hear from our expert speakers. And so now I'm happy to introduce, again, reintroduce Rabbi Rachel Contraster with the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility.
Great. It's really exciting to be here. For me, I'm just really thrilled to see Dayenu launch this campaign. The Jewish community doesn't have as strong a track record as other faith communities of doing corporate advocacy. Either they've done political advocacy or we've focused on tzedakah, using our donations to make change, but not actually thinking of the places where our money is invested. And we leave a lot of power on the table. So I'm really grateful for all of you to be moving forward on this campaign. So as mentioned, I work at the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. We are a 51-year-old organization founded to ask the largest companies in the world to align their corporate practices with the best interests of people and planet. We are guided by faith and committed to action. We started off by filing shareholder resolutions to fight apartheid in South Africa, and our founding members were faith-based organizations, largely the pension funds of Protestant denominations and the United Church of Christ. Our membership has expanded to include Catholic members, a couple of Jewish members, a lot of values-based asset managers, as well as NGOs and unions, guided by the idea that we should hold corporations accountable for their impacts on all of us. Our members are not, generally speaking, individuals. They are, pension funds or large institutional investors. And one of our major areas of investment, of corporate engagement is to fight climate change. And one of our areas of focus is in climate finance. Typically speaking, if we look at like what you can do with your money for good, there's like where you invest your money for good, that's like impact investing, there's divesting your money, and then there's engaging with the companies that you own, that's shareholder advocacy. Our members tend to do all three of those things, but we focus on that last thing, engaging with the corporations through filing shareholder resolutions and other forms of corporate dialogue. And we even are able to do that through, a lot of our members have advocacy portfolios. So they might have a small amount of money invested in, say, a private prison. If they don't want to make money off a private prison, they've divested from private prisons, but they own just enough of the company to be able to engage with them for action. Shareholder resolutions are really about getting the corporation to change. It's not about having enough shares to like get a majority vote, like just by the amount of shares that you own, but it's about persuading other shareholders that what you are asking the company to do is in their best interest. Typically speaking, if we look at the calendar of shareholder season, shareholder resolutions are filed in the fall. Corporations then engage with the people who filed them to try and get them to withdraw them for some kind of resolution, saying they'll commit to action. That usually happens now. They'll also file what are called no action letters saying with the Securities and Exchange Commission saying we don't have to actually follow the shareholder resolution. It shouldn't be submitted. And the shareholder meetings are generally speaking held in the spring. And this is really, this type of advocacy is something that the faith community has a lot of history of doing, as I mentioned, and it can have a real impact in getting corporations to change their behavior. It also works best when it's part of a larger campaign. We often have an inside strategy speaking to the corporations, their shareholders, but we're accountable to broader movements. So as mentioned, one of our campaigns is in dealing with the banks and insurance companies who are underwriting fossil fuel expansion. And getting them to shift their finance is an important part of a shift to a clean energy economy. The largest global banks have provided the fossil fuel industry with trillions of dollars in financing since the Paris Agreement was signed. And so they have to quickly shift their lending away from supporting a fossil fuel economy. Bank lending determines which projects move forward and which ones don't, because banks are able to create money and give out credit. They wield a huge influence over the companies and projects on a scale that few other entities can approach. I think it's also important that we engage with our banks because, for example, a number of ICCR members no longer themselves invest in the fossil fuel industry, but the banks they're invested in do. So it's we can continue to fight climate change while still actually having members who have divested from fossil fuels. And so a number of resolutions have been filed with companies this year. Vicki, if you could share the one that I sent you, that would be great. This is a resolution that it's public. It was filed by As You Sow, which was mentioned in chat. It was filed at Chase. This is a fairly typical shareholder resolution. One thing that I learned was that we can't file shareholder resolutions that just say company X stop doing Y, and that if it passes, then the company will stop doing it. We often have to just ask the company to, write a report or, create a plan, and that will be the ask of their shareholder resolution. And if a company says that they'll do that, we will often withdraw our shareholder resolution. I'm putting into chat an article that just came out this week about the New York City pension funds engagements with Apple, where they'd filed a shareholder resolution on freedom of association and unionization. And because the company agreed to do what they asked, they withdrew it. But a similar resolution at Starbucks is still going forward because the company hasn't responded. It's also important to note that you don't need to achieve a majority vote to get a company to respond. We found that the same resolution often gets filed a couple of times. The number of investors who vote for it grows. And usually by the time we get to about the 30% threshold, the companies will take it seriously. So even if we don't get what we want this year, we'll continue to engage with these companies. 2021 was kind of a high point for engagement with companies about their fossil fuel commitments. A number of resolutions achieved high votes, partly through engagement with the big asset managers like BlackRock or State Street or Vanguard, who not only themselves invest in fossil fuel projects, but they're also the major investors in the banks. So if they choose to support a shareholder resolution, it's likely to pass. This past year in 2022, we saw some backsliding. The big asset managers didn't vote for as many resolutions that were like specifically asked for things. So this is really important. Our banks and our asset managers need to hear from us that we want the fossil fuel, that we want there to be no new financing for fossil fuel projects. And we think that it's really important that they hear both the moral case and the financial case for why they should not continue to do that. It's really important that we work together. The more that we share our stories about this work and tell our banks why we don't want them to support fossil fuel, new investments in fossil fuels and its expansion, the more they'll understand it doesn't meet with their brand. We have to remember that like it won't necessarily change the value of the company. Corporate campaigns affect brands and not sales. But our banks need to hear from us that it's not in their best interest and what we value for them to be investing in fossil fuel expansion. So like I said, these resolutions are up for the companies. A number of them have been filed this year. There's also similar resolutions on insurance companies. And this is the time now when our when our members are meeting with these companies to try and get them to make these changes. Another thing that we often do is that if a shareholder resolution passes, but the company doesn't do anything, we then you're starting to see campaigns aimed at the boards of directors saying, your shareholders have asked you this thing, it's passed. We want you to, study your impact on fossil fuel expansion, and you didn't listen to them. And so last year, we also saw a number of campaigns to try and vote out directors, not necessarily at banks, but at fossil fuel companies for not listening to investors. That's a really quick introduction to what we do, but it's exciting to see Dayenu's work and the work of all of your Dayenu circles to potentially support these larger efforts of institutional investors to get their banks to stop underwriting the fossil fuel industry.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for even that brief overview of all of the really good work that's happening a lot behind the scenes and out in public to help decipher, when we're reading in newspapers about shareholder meetings and this many people voted for this shareholder resolution, what that means, and that our goal here when we act together and we act publicly, that we're contributing to efforts to increase votes on certain resolutions like the one that you shared, which over time, as part of a broader movement using inside and outside strategies, impacts decision-making from the banks that we need to make different decisions. So thank you so much, Rachel. I'm happy now to welcome Mark Grossman, who, as a member of Congregation Beth Am in Northern California, as a member of their Green Team and now their Dayenu Circle, has helped lead an effort like this. Mark is also an organizer with 350 Bay Area. Mark, please share with us for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes a little bit about your experience, and I think we'll be able to welcome you back at a future office hours to go into more depth. So thanks for being here
Sure.
tonight for an overview.
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, so I'll try and be quick. It's a good-sized congregation I'm at. It's maybe 800 families, I'm not sure, 5 rabbis. And when I started looking into this, there wasn't really a big focus on environmental issues at our congregation. That one of the rabbis was fairly supportive of increasing involvement. So with my 350 climate change activism hat on, I started getting interested in what we could do at Beth Am, because faith groups were a target for our local chapter. See if we could make a difference there. Previously, a couple of the members brought in some move your money, your individual investments and banking. We had some presentations that were decently attended. We also did some learning breakouts during high holidays where we tied climate action to scripture. And so that let us sort of set the stage where, wanting to live our values piece of things was brought in. And in the process, we gathered some emails of interested congregants. So then after I expressed interest in the finances of our congregation, I was invited to join the finance committee. So I was like, right there in the mix. I already had a pretty good base of knowledge in investing, and then obviously the problems with fossil fuel investing, and some of the tools that are out there that some of the people put in the chat for like how you research better investments. slight correction to what Vicky said. We did not move our bank. That will be our next effort, but I was able to look at their portfolio, which included mutual funds and so forth, with our outside asset manager, and was able to identify some alternatives. And I also came to the meeting with, articles and graphs showing that, yeah, if you remove fossil fuels from your portfolio, you actually reduce risk. So basically talking the talk, which the managers understood. And fortunately, it took a couple years of just going to the meetings and doing the normal participation, but the committee members saw the benefit and saw the alignment with our values. And so we were able to get the board of the congregation to approve new guidance, which was, really just a one-word change because there were already some negative screens for weapons and so forth. So it was, it was just work, but it wasn't impossible in my case. We also have a Dayenu circle doing personal investment, move your money things, and I've shared some of the materials with Dayenu, and maybe you'll see some of that, and answers some of the questions I see flying by in the chat. So I hope that actually is useful. So every situation, every congregation is going to be different. There's going to be some allies somewhere. You have to find them. You have to do power mapping and figure out, like, okay, if it's an employee you have to convince, then figure out, how to deal with that. If they're just a volunteer, then you have a different set of, challenges. But basically, come with data. Don't be a flamethrower, and just be patient, and ultimately tying climate concerns to Jewish values, I think, really helps kind of grease the skids and overall creates a greener congregation.
Thank you so much, Mark. Can you tell us what year did you start this process in your congregation? You didn't say.
Oops, I got muted again. Sorry.
When
Did we start? It was probably at most 3 years ago. It started down that particular path.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. Well, like I said, I think we'll definitely have you back at an upcoming office hours, which I'll let folks know about in just a minute here. Thank you for this brief overview to let us know both that it is possible in community and some tips and pitfalls that you faced along the way. Thanks for your time tonight, Mark.
Sure.
All right, folks, we are nearing the end of our conversation. So this is the time to start. I'll invite you to start making some plans with us. Just a heads up, we had at first planned this to go to 9:45 Eastern, and then thought we could finish it by 9:30. I think we'll wrap up at about 9:35 or 9:40. So if you can stick around till then, or for those of us on the West Coast, 6:35 or 6:40, I think that's when we'll be able to wrap up. So how are folks feeling right now? Like, roll your shoulders. This is a lot of information. This is like an invitation to be part of a big movement, to travel the road that Rachel blessed us to go on together. I want to remind folks to check the FAQ that we have at our website with our report to answer many of the very good questions that I've seen just flying through the chat, which is awesome. Thank you for those good questions. And to those of you who are answering each other questions, thank you. We have many good questions in the FAQ. And if Muriel or Phil could drop the report link again, there it is. Thank you. That's our FAQ. We continue to add to that as well. So now is the time for me to ask, will you join us in part of this first cohort of exploration, education, and action this winter and spring? If you are like, yes, we're in, or like, I think I want to be in, but I have a few more questions, throw a star, an asterisk in the chat right now. Like, you're ready to go this path or explore this path with us. Let us know in the chat. Ooh, I saw the first 2 stars. Oh my gosh, there's so many. I don't know what it means when someone puts 3 stars in. That's like, you're really ready to go. Beautiful. Oh, I mean, it's going so fast, I can't even see all the names. To the first person who responded, Joel and Chelsea, thank you. And Max and Ditta and Michelle and Meredith and Debbie and Stephanie and Bob and Betty. And just to see all of each other's names there and know that we are moving together and building a supportive community for action. I want to show you now a slide with all of the resources that we are providing or will provide for you. Of course, there's the report. We'll have a community conversation guide, how to run one of these larger community conversations to educate your community. We'll have sample letters to share with your bank and share publicly. Draft press releases, a music playlist, and our bi-weekly office hours that I'm excited to tell you more about. And actually, if we could jump to the office hours slide, I'm just going to go right there. You don't need to read all of this, what's on your screen right now, but just to show you how thoroughly we have charted out this winter and spring for you, so that we can work together on this process. We're going to have office hours every other Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, hopefully around lunchtime for you, with a theme at each of the sessions. And note, it's mostly every other Wednesday, but with Jewish holidays, sometimes we're off about a week. And each week has a theme. So I want to invite you all right now to our very first office hours next Wednesday, January 5th at 2 Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, where we'll focus on getting started, how to host your first core team meeting to build your core team that Mark identified he was part of. I saw somebody put in the chat, maybe people from the finance team and the social justice team. Maybe there are some new people who you know have a particular interest and alignment on this issue that you want to invite in, bring in new leadership. A note, just a preview for our first office hours, you want your core team to be people that you know are on team, move your dough. Not the people that need to be convinced, but the folks that are there with you. That's your core team that will help you plan the community conversation and engage your community. We'll also cover at our first office hours next Wednesday, how to research your bank, and just identify where your institution banks at, and what their investments in fossil fuels are. And we'll of course share out these weekly topics. For all of our office hours, we'll have guest speakers, such as Mark, and others come and help us with those. They're a lot of fun. So before we finish tonight, I want to ask that everybody here, even if there's multiple people from the same organization, please fill out this commitment form that we're putting in, interest form. You don't have to make the commitment yet to move your money, but we just want to find out where you're at, what you're feeling ready to take on. You'll see questions in there like, do you want to organize a community conversation? The sooner we know that you want to do that, we can help you get planning and get ready. We ask about office hours. When you fill that out, we'll invite you into those bi-weekly office hours and share with you the Zoom link to join us. So that's my ask for you tonight. Let us know, please, what stage you're at by filling out this interest form. You'll see as well in that form, we have a question for what obstacles do you think you might face? What kind of support might you want? We really want to hear that from you. I think the chat tonight has been really vibrant, and Mark lifted up some challenges, some stumbling blocks that we faced. We want to help you address them together. Okay, let's see. What else? If I've missed anything else I want to make sure I share with you. Yes, your very next steps. Your first steps, I think I've covered these. Attending the kickoff, Mazel Tov, congratulations, you've done it, you were here tonight, thank you, or you've watched the video. Number 2 is completing the interest form that Muriel has shared in the chat. We'll of course also share that with you over email with the recording of tonight's conversation. And then your third action step is to join our bi-weekly office hours starting next Wednesday, January 25th, where we'll cover forming your core team and doing some research. I really want to thank all of our speakers tonight, Rabbi Rachel Kahn-Stroster, Dalia Rakowitz, and Mark Grossman. I want to thank each of you, more than 150 people, for joining us tonight to learn and embark on this journey together, and for your commitments to action, to climate justice. I'm so excited about what this first cohort working together can learn and accomplish. Look out for that follow-up email with the recording of this event, next Wednesday's first office hours, and more resources from us that we are putting together right now for you. I encourage you to read the report and share it. Let's bring more people into this movement with us. Thank you so much and have a wonderful night. I'll see many of you next week at office hours. Good night, everybody.